They were retired early, the officer said, his voice low, uncertain, as if even he knew the explanation wasn't enough, and Cole's expression hardened instantly, his jaw tightening as he waited for more, knowing there had to be more. The officer hesitated, then continued, each word heavier than the last. There's a deal with a private contractor. They're bringing in new dogs. The explanation felt cold, detached, as if these weren't living beings they were discussing, but replaceable equipment, and Cole felt something inside him snap. And the ones not sold? He asked, his voice sharper now, more dangerous. The officer didn't answer immediately, and that silence said everything. But eventually the words came, quiet, almost reluctant. They're euthanized. The impact of that single sentence rippled through the entire yard, and the crowd reacted instantly, gasps breaking the heavy silence, people looking at each other in shock, disbelief, horror. But for Cole, it wasn't just shocking, it was unacceptable. His fists clenched tightly at his sides, his entire body tense with anger that had been building since the moment he stepped into that place. And then suddenly, before anyone could say another word, a loud thud echoed from one of the cages. A dog had collapsed. Panic spread instantly as people turned toward the sound. Inside the cage, Blitz lay on the ground, his body trembling uncontrollably, his breathing uneven, weak. The other dogs reacted immediately, their barking erupting into chaos, loud, desperate, frantic. Cole didn't hesitate. He rushed toward the cage, dropping to his knees beside it, trying to assess the situation, his hands gripping the bars. "Open it!" he shouted, his voice cutting through the noise, but no one moved fast enough. The crowd watched, frozen between fear and confusion, as Blitz struggled, every second feeling longer than the last. "Now!" Cole shouted again, louder, more urgent, his authority undeniable. The tension in the air reached its peak, thick and overwhelming, until suddenly the sound of an engine broke through everything. A black SUV pulled into the yard quickly, its presence commanding immediate attention. The vehicle came to a stop, and a woman stepped out, her movements confident, controlled. She flashed her badge. Internal affairs. Everything shifted instantly. The officers who had been avoiding eye contact now stood stiff, their nervousness turning into something closer to fear. The woman moved forward with purpose, already asking questions, and already demanding answers. Cole stood and met her halfway, explaining everything quickly, clearly, every detail that had unfolded. Documents were brought out, reviewed, examined, and piece by piece, the truth began to unravel. Corruption, negligence, betrayal of everything those dogs had stood for. The auction was shut down immediately, orders were given, control was taken, and just like that, everything changed. One by one, the cages were unlocked. The sound of metal doors opening echoed across the yard, a sound that felt almost symbolic, like chains breaking. The first dog stepped out slowly, cautiously, unsure if it was real. Then another followed, and another. Some walked with hesitation, others with quiet confidence, but all of them carried the same question. Was this truly freedom? Titan approached Cole first, pressing his head gently against him, a silent gesture of trust and recognition. Ranger followed, his tail wagging softly, cautious but hopeful. Blitz, after a moment, managed to stand again, weak but alive, supported by the presence around him. The crowd watched in silence now, the atmosphere completely transformed. But Shadow remained inside his cage, still, waiting. Cole turned toward him and walked slowly, his steps calm, now steady. He reached the cage, opened the door himself, and stepped inside without hesitation. He knelt down and wrapped his arms around Shadow, holding him tightly, the weight of everything finally settling into that one moment. "You're safe now," he whispered softly, and after a brief pause, Shadow stepped forward, out of the cage, out of the past, and into something new. Days later, yet the scene was completely different. No cages, no chains, just open land stretching as far as the eye could see. The dogs ran freely across the fields, their energy returning, their spirits alive again. Cole stood quietly, watching them, a sense of peace replacing the anger that had once filled him. He reached down and gently placed Jake's badge onto Shadow's collar, a symbol, a memory, a promise that would never be broken. And as the sun slowly set over the horizon, casting golden light across the land, the dogs ran together. As Cole turned back toward the rows of cages, and finally his instincts sharpened as they had always guiding him deeper into the yard, where the noise seemed to fade, and something more personal began to take shape. And that's when he saw it. A single dog sitting still among the restless movement of the others, not barking, not pacing, not reacting like the rest, but simply watching him with an intensity that felt almost human. The dog slowly stepped closer to the front of the cage, pressing its face gently against the metal bars, its eyes locked onto Cole's, as if trying to bridge a distance far greater than the few feet between them. Cole stopped walking. Something inside him shifted instantly. Something old, something buried. His breathing slowed, his focus narrowed, and for a moment the entire world around him seemed to disappear. He took a step closer, saw his eyes searching the dog's face, reading details that no one else would notice, the shape of the ears, the scar near the eye, the way it held its posture. And then it hit him, recognition, deep, undeniable recognition. His voice dropped to a whisper, almost as if he didn't trust the moment to be real. Shadow. The name hung in the air, fragile but powerful, and the dog reacted immediately. Its ears twitched, its body tensed slightly, and a soft, emotional whine escaped from deep within its chest. Its tail moved just barely, hesitant, unsure, but alive with memory. Cole dropped to his knees in front of the cage, his hand gripping the bars. As he leaned closer, his eyes filling with something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a long time. Shadow, his partner, the one who had been there through everything, and in that instant. Yet the past came rushing back with overwhelming force. The warehouse, the darkness, the operation that had gone wrong in a matter of seconds. Cole remembered moving through the building with his team, every step careful, every sense alert, the air thick with tension. Jake had been right beside him, laughing quietly just minutes earlier, confident as always. And Shadow had been leading, focused, precise, doing exactly what he had been trained to do. Then the gunfire started, loud, sudden, violent. The entire space erupted into chaos as bullets tore through the air, officers shouting, commands overlapping, confusion spreading faster than control. Cole remembered diving for cover, shouting for his team, trying to regain control of a situation that was already slipping away. And then he saw it, Jake being hit. The moment slowed, stretched, burned into memory as Jake's body jerked from the impact before collapsing to the ground. "Jake!" Cole had shouted, but the sound was drowned by everything else. And before anyone could react, Shadow had already moved. Without hesitation, without fear, he jumped over Jake's body, placing himself between his partner and the danger, refusing to leave, refusing to abandon him, even as the chaos continued around them. Cole remembered crawling toward them, the sound of his own heartbeat louder than anything else, the fear, the desperation, the helplessness. Jake lying there, barely conscious, Shadow standing guard, unwavering, loyal to the very end. The memory cut deep, sharper than time could dull, and as it faded, Cole found himself back in the present, still kneeling in front of Shadow's cage. His chest felt tight, his emotions barely contained, as he looked into the eyes of the one who had stayed when everything else had fallen apart. Around them, the energy in the yard began to shift again. The other dogs, sensing something, began to react, first with soft whines, then with louder barking, their movements growing restless, agitated, as if they too felt the tension building in the air. Cole stood slowly, his expression no longer just emotional, but now hard, focused, and filled with rising anger. Something was very wrong here, and now it was personal. He turned sharply toward the officers again, his voice stronger this time, carrying authority that demanded answers. "What is going on here?" The question hung heavier now, backed by everything he had just remembered. The officers hesitated again, their discomfort impossible to hide. at their silence stretching too long. The barking of the dogs grew louder, filling the space, amplifying the tension, pushing everything toward a breaking point. Finally, one officer stepped forward, his movements reluctant, his expression conflicted. He looked at Cole, then briefly at the ground, before speaking words that would change everything. Words that confirmed the truth Cole had already begun to sense, but wasn't prepared to hear. The old wooden sign creaked softly in the warm, dusty wind, its faded letters barely holding on to meaning. Retired police dogs for sale? A sentence that should never have existed, especially not for the heroes sitting silently behind the rusted metal cages lined across the yard. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows that stretched like forgotten memories across the ground, and inside each cage sat a German shepherd, once strong, once proud, now tired, worn, and confused. These were not ordinary dogs. These were trained K-9 officers who had spent years risking their lives in service, tracking criminals, detecting danger, protecting officers, saving lives. Their bodies carried scars, their eyes carried stories, but today none of that mattered to the crowd gathering around them. People walked past casually, some curious, some calculating, some completely indifferent. They looked at teeth, posture, strength, age, like buyers at a livestock market, never asking how many lives these dogs had saved, never wondering what they had sacrificed to earn the quiet dignity they still carried. One dog slowly lifted his head, his eyes scanning the crowd with fading hope, searching for a familiar face that never appeared. Another pressed his nose against the cold metal bars, exhaling softly as his breath fogged the surface, a quiet whine escaping him as if he understood something was terribly wrong. Time moved slowly in that yard, heavy with silence and something unspoken, until suddenly everything changed. A voice broke through the noise, strong and clear, cutting across the murmurs of the crowd. The auctioneer froze mid-sentence, and his gavel suspended in the air, as if time itself had paused. All eyes turned toward the source of the voice as a man stepped forward, Officer Cole Bennett, his uniform neat but worn, his face calm, yet carrying a weight that few could understand. He walked into the center of the yard, with purpose, his gaze steady, his presence commanding attention, without force. Then he spoke again, louder this time, his words echoing through the still air. "I'll take all of them." For a moment no one reacted. The words seemed too big, too impossible to be real. Silence fell across the yard like a sudden storm, every movement stopping, every sound disappearing. But Cole didn't hesitate, didn't look around for approval or reaction. He meant every word. And somehow, the dogs felt it. Inside the cages, a shift began. One dog slowly stood up, ears lifting, its body alert, as if awakened from a long, heavy sleep. Then another followed, and another, until all across the yard, the dogs began rising to their feet, drawn by something deeper than sound, something they remembered but couldn't explain. Cole walked slowly past them, his boots stirring the dust beneath him, his eyes meeting theirs one by one. In those moments, he wasn't just looking at animals. He was seeing partners, soldiers, survivors. He saw loyalty that had never broken, even when everything else had. He saw pain that had been ignored and strength that had been forgotten. He stopped beside one cage and knelt down, bringing himself to the level of the dog inside. Their eyes met, and in that silent exchange, something passed between them, understanding, respect, and something else, something heavier, around him. Yet the dogs began whining softly, some pressing their bodies against the bars, others pawing gently as if reaching for him, as if asking a question only he could answer. One dog leaned forward and gently licked the cold metal, its movements slow, tired, but filled with longing. Cole placed his hand against the bars, feeling the chill of the metal, but also feeling the weight of something far more troubling. This wasn't right. None of this was right. He stood up slowly, his expression shifting as suspicion began to replace emotion. His eyes scanned the yard, taking in the uneasy movements, the forced normalcy, the subtle tension that didn't belong. Nearby, a group of officers stood watching, but something about them felt off. They avoided his gaze, their posture stiff, their silence louder than words. Cole walked toward them, as each step deliberate, his presence now carrying authority mixed with urgency. "What is going on here?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. The officers exchanged glances, their hesitation immediate, their answers unclear and unconvincing. Their words didn't match their expressions. Their tone didn't match the situation, and Cole knew, instantly, that they were hiding something. He narrowed his eyes slightly, studying them, reading the discomfort they couldn't hide. Then he turned his head slightly, looking back at the cages, at the dogs, at the entire scene unfolding before him. And in that moment, a realization began to form. Something deeper was wrong here, something far beyond a simple auction, and whatever it was only just beginning to reveal itself.